Good evening and welcome to the Strawberry Seed Consulting free webinar for February. Today I am joined by Tanya Hewlett O'Neill and Melanie Kesey, who'll be going through the understanding assessment tools and better hiring for stronger teams. I'd just like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands that we're all meeting on today and pay respect to elders past, present, and emerging. And I'd also like to extend that to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders that are joining us today. Now, before we begin, I just want to have a quick introduction to who we are. If you're not familiar, we're Strawberry Seed Consulting. We're a boutique HR and recruitment firm that work with clients all across Australia. This is my gorgeous team, two of which are joining us tonight to present. And we essentially work for everything from hiring through to firing and everything in between. And today we're going to talk about some of the tools that we can use and we can use with clients or our clients can use. And we're particularly going to talk about, go into a bit of detail on two that we are actually accredited to deliver. But there are many, many different tools out there, and it's also about understanding what they are and how they can be used in your business. So I'm now going to hand over to Tanya and Mel, who will be presenting for you today. Thank you.
Thanks, Carly. Hi, everyone. I'm Mel. This is Tanya, if you can see her. So we're both senior HR advisors here at Strawberry Seed. We've both sadly had many years in HR, which is an indicator of our age, but 25 years each in HR. And look, over that time, we've experienced all different facets of HR, from recruitment, org development, training, L&D. And during that time, you get exposure to lots of different tools, particularly when you're working in different organisations. So we've used multiple assessment tools across our time, and we have some preferences, and we have some that we prefer for certain purposes. So we're here today to help you demystify the assessment tools and give you a bit of a snapshot. So I'm going to start first, and then I'll hand over to Tad.
I'll also just jump in because I did forget to say that if you do have any questions as we go along, please feel free to pop them in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen or top of your screen, wherever your menu bar is, and we will make sure we answer them at the end. So over to you guys.
Beautiful. Yeah. So just an overview of what we're going to cover today. We're going to walk through the different categories of assessment tools. So there are different types. We're going to look at what each one measures and what the differences are. We're going to talk through how assessments can help when they're not the right fit, maybe when they're overkill or not required. We'll look at exploring some practical examples of how tools can support things like recruitment, development, coaching, team communication, team dynamics, that sort of thing. And in particular, we're going to have a little bit of a mini deep dive into Facet5 and DISC. Those are tools that Tanya and I really like and we're accredited in, and they're tools that we often refer to clients through our work in Strawberry Seed. So we're going to talk through how those particular tools can be helpful in your businesses. So when do assessment tools help? Something that's mostly important is fitness for purpose, and so figuring out what you want to use an assessment tool for is obviously really important. So having clarity of the purpose and what you're trying to achieve from using an assessment tool, it's important that they're valid and reliable. There are a lot of tools out there. All are fallible in some ways. It's not an exact science, although there is a lot of sophistication behind how these tools work. People are complex, and so results are only as good as the data that goes into them. And they're generally used as just one part of a broader decision-making process. So, we never suggest that people rely solely on assessment tools to inform decision-making in HR situations. And so when it comes to interpreting results of assessment tools, you'll see that online you can sometimes do a free, quick assessment tool, and you'll get a short summary. But when you do the deeper dive full assessments, you'll get a quite comprehensive report. And in order to actually interpret that, you have to be accredited. And so it's important to make sure that when you use these tools, you know how to work with the data that it gives you, and use trained people to do that. So these assessment tools really just support decisions. They're not to replace judgment. They really just are one tool in the toolbox when you're making decisions around things like recruitment, things like that. They're not about labeling people. There are the tools will themselves sort of spit out profiles and types and traits and a whole lot of things like that. Um, but people are complex. Humans are always evolving and changing, and we're different in different situations, and we're never fixed in one particular way of being. So, the best tools are ones that don't assign a fixed label on someone. They allow for some flexibility and for people to evolve and grow. But used well, they do help increase clarity, and that can be clarity for individuals in terms of self-awareness or clarity in understanding other individuals and making decisions about like hiring decisions based on that sort of information. So the tools really strengthen your decision making. They can, in some cases, some particular tools are really helpful for improving communication and interpersonal dynamics. And we'll talk a little bit about that today. Um, and yeah, for recruitment, so supporting better hiring and stronger teams. So some of the insights that tools can give us help just add another dimension to, tailoring decision making around recruitment competencies and the types of traits that we're looking for in someone and what's the right fit for the team environment that we're recruiting for. So the key is really choosing the right tool for the right purpose. And so one of the things that we would always suggest to clients is that if you're considering using a tool, is to have a chat with us and we'll help you understand exactly what your objectives are and what's the most useful, beneficial tool to use to achieve what you're trying to do. Um, the common types of assessment tools, so there's a few. We're going to go through the different ones here, and before we do a little bit of a deep dive. So personality and behavioural assessments are quite common. Sometimes you'll hear them called psychometric testing as well. But these tools really measure behavioural preferences. So they're looking at the way people tend to behave and their default settings or their preferred tendencies for the way that they respond in certain situations. They can also look at things like strengths, communication styles. Some tools will look at core motivators and drivers so that you can help understand what really is at the heart of how to help motivate somebody or improve performance, that sort of thing. So some examples we've listed there, Facet5 and DISC, and they're the two we're going to have a deeper look at today. You might be familiar with Hogan. MBTI is a really common one. And so they all generally, personality and behavioural assessments really look at things like personality, but also how you tend to show up, how you tend to behave in certain contexts and situations. So how you prefer to interact with others, how you make decisions, how you respond in emotional or stress-based situations. So you get a lot of really good insight from personality and behavioural assessment tools. Just going to throw to Tanya for a sec.
Okay, so the Big Five model. What is the Big Five model? It's also known as the five-factor model. So this is like a research-based framework, and it's been developed over decades by multiple organisations, multiple psychologists, and it's pretty much identifying four key areas to help, you know, give personality within this framework. So the areas that it covers, oh Mel, I've just got to, sorry. Okay, so the five key areas in a lot of these assessments are openness. So that's about your curiosity, your creativity, openness to new ideas, conscientiousness, which is about reliability, follow through, extroversion, this is about your energy, social interactions, level of assertiveness, agreeableness, which is your empathy and approach to collaboration. And then there's also emotional stability, which is also called neuroticism, and I'll touch on this a little bit later on. So personality assessments are most useful for increasing self-awareness, identifying strengths and areas for development, and obtaining insight for coaching purposes, and identifying core drivers and motivators. So they're particularly helpful when behavioural fit is really critical to the success of a role. And the role requires things like influencing, collaboration, and leadership. It's also good for looking at strengths within team dynamics, which we'll touch on a little bit later on with DISC profiling, and supporting leadership and development coaching. And also if you need a deeper insight beyond what just an interview can reveal. So common types of assessments. A practical example for having a personality-based assessment in the workplace is if you're recruiting a general manager to lead a growing team. So interviews show two strong candidates with similar experience. The personality assessments highlights that one candidate has a highly directive, fast-paced style, but the team that they lead values consultation and relationship building. So what sort of things would insight from that profiling help with the hiring managers in making decisions? And that's about you could then look at what sort of deep dive questions you'd be asking within the interview process, just to make sure that this is helping you make a decision that's going to reduce the risks of having cultural misalignment in the business. Another type of common assessment is cognitive ability assessments. So there's various cognitive ability assessments: verbal, reasoning, numerical reasoning, abstract reasoning, and then speed and accuracy of thinking. So these are used to predict the capacity to handle complexity and learn new information quickly. These tools are most helpful for roles that require like complex information and data. It's very data heavy. Problem solving is a core requirement in roles that these work particularly well with. And especially if you need like an objective comparison between candidates. So they're a strong predictor of job performance, particularly in roles with high complexity. So a practical example of when you might use this in the workplace would be if you were perhaps recruiting a financial controller. So, typically a financial controller role would involve interpreting complex financial data, forecasting, and advising the executive team. So alongside with a holistic approach to recruitment with your interviews, your reference checks, perhaps an organization might look to implement like a numerical and logical reasoning assessment. And perhaps, in that assessment, it might highlight that one candidate's got really strong experience, but lower data interpretation when speed is required, when speed is part of the equation and they're having to meet deadlines. So this would allow you to explore further questions in your interview process to understand, okay, so how might that person, what might they do to change their personal situation when they're trying to produce reports with really, really tight deadlines? What support structures do they have around them in the workplace to ensure that they're meeting those deadlines? What have they put in place to support them, knowing that that's potentially an area for development for them? Mel, over to you.
So the next one's pretty self-explanatory. So skills and technical assessments, and this is looking at when you require a competency or a capability assessment. It's kind of black and white. It's looking at measuring job-specific skills. So those sort of tools look at assessing technical skills, software proficiency. It might be something like an Excel or Word assessment. Writing ability. I'm surprised I asked one of my colleagues today, do we still do typing speed and things like that, and apparently that's still a thing. But so those sorts of things, but really task-based stuff too. So sometimes it could be like demonstrating competency in a manual task and demonstrating that to somebody. I'll just grab the little clicker. So it's common in professional services, trades, finance, and technology roles. So you're looking at using a technical assessment when you really want to measure capability. So as opposed to the personality and behavioral tools, which will tell you predictions of how people are likely to behave or most often will behave, a technical assessment is measuring actual ability and competency in a specific task. So they provide objective evidence of skill. So that's a pretty straightforward one. An example though for this type of assessment tool, maybe in a case of recruiting a marketing manager, if the role requires strong digital capability, data interpretation, campaign execution, the interview process will offer you a lot of insight into the candidate, but you might require more evidence of real capability, and that's where you might use a tool like this. So as part of the final stage of recruitment, you might invite candidates to complete a short, simple, sample task. And you might create mock scenarios for them to go through, but you're really wanting to assess how do they actually perform this task and how capable are they of doing it. Another example, if a candidate interviews competently, but you only get a surface level kind of overview, and you want to have a little bit of a deeper dive and confirm exactly how competent or capable they are. They might, for example, present structured insights, identify data gaps, and propose practical improvements. But the technical assessment might provide more deep objective evidence of the actual capability.
Yeah.
And so it's again just another measuring tool in the toolbox. It's not the ultimate decider necessarily, but it's certainly part of the decision-making process at times. Values and culture assessments. Some of the tools we spoke about earlier, the personality and behavioural tools, have components of values and culture assessment incorporated into them. And they can be really, there are some that are just standalone values and culture though as well. They can be really good for identifying alignment between the individual's values and the organizational values and making sure that those things are aligned. So values and culture assessments are really helpful for things like identifying core drivers and motivators. This can point to, someone's leadership style and the things that are important to them, how they make decisions, their workplace preferences, alignment with purpose and culture. And so often during leadership hiring, particularly when organizations are going through things like navigating significant change, and they might be hiring somebody to come in who they need to really soothe people through that transition, or be really empathetic and care about how people are feeling about the change. It might be that they are targeting certain values of empathy and care and kindness and support. And so sometimes those things are key to look at, and there are tools for that. So they're most useful when alignment matters as much as capability. And so this is really looking at what's important to people, what guides and informs the way that they behave. So you would typically use it for things like hiring senior leaders or culture carriers, scaling a business, protecting culture. So again, if you're in the throes of organizational change and you're wanting to make sure that somebody is brought in to support that change in a positive way, you might want to make sure there's that alignment. If there's cultural tension or misalignment, then again, it might be that you really need to hire for a particular value set to make sure that you can overcome some of those barriers. So they help identify whether an individual's core drivers and workplace preferences align with the organisation's environment and expectations. So again, it's just about matching up what we need versus what this person can bring.
Okay, so let's just do a recap of recruitment and how assessment tools can actually support good recruitment decisions. So they can add objective data alongside the interviews. They identify strengths and development risks, highlight alignment with specific role requirements, and reduce bias in hiring decisions. So again, a practical example is you might be hiring a sales manager. You've done some behavioural profiles. A behavioural profile highlights that an individual's got really strong influential skills, but low detail orientation. So, in the behavioural profile, it showed you that they're energetic, they're, driven, they've got high influential skills, they're confident, they're promoters. So they're all of the key behaviours that you need for a really successful sales manager. However, that low attention to detail, or okay, so you'd be able to say, okay, so how important and critical is this to the success of the role? Are there other departments or people around that sales manager that can come in and pick up some of those tasks? Is that something that you can support them with the onboarding process? So again, that assessment tool just gives that much deeper insight to help you make decisions on fit for the role. How assessments are used for development. So when using assessment tools specifically for individual development, it's going to increase an employee's self-awareness. It will identify leadership gaps in leadership capability. It will help prepare and inform coaching conversations, and also with succession planning. So again, just to provide a practical example of how you might use assessments in the workplace. You've got 2 high performers that are being considered for future executive roles. The assessment shows that one has really strong strategic thinking, but lower influencing capability. The other's got really strong stakeholder alignment and composure under pressure. So that gives you an opportunity to look at, okay, what are the behaviours that are really going to underpin future success of this role? What are the characteristics and behaviours that we feel are going to be most beneficial for this role? And again, that assessment tool or the assessment can help you with making those decisions. In relation to team communication, so and this is something Mel's going to touch on a little bit later on how we use DISC to support our clients with, any sort of conflict or team issues that they're navigating. So assessment tools can help improve understanding of the different working types, reduce conflict, strengthen collaboration, and also clarify team strengths and gaps. So, an example is that we've got a leadership team. There's lots of high Ds, for example. There's a history of a little bit of conflict between the team. You come in, you do a DISC assessment, and the session uncovers that, yes, there's this dominance of fast-paced decision makers with limited reflective styles. So that then gives you an opportunity to go, okay, what are we going to do in our team and in this business to ensure that the team just slow it down a little bit. They're talking, they're discussing through ideas and strategies before they're making a decision to implement them. Okay, so personality versus cognitive versus technical assessments. So just to recap, personality assessments measure behavioural preferences and working styles. So they're specifically used to understand communication styles, leadership approach, team fit, motivators, and potential derailers. So they're best for leadership roles, team development, and recruitment where behavioural fit really matters. So again, personality assessments do not measure skill or intelligence. In relation to cognitive assessments, so they measure thinking ability and problem-solving capacity. So they're ideally used to understand reasoning ability, learning agility, data interpretation, and decision-making under complexity. So these types of assessments are best fit for really complex or analytical roles, graduate recruitment as well, and roles requiring fast learning. So cognitive assessments obviously don't measure personality or cultural fit. Technical assessments. So these are more about measuring job-specific knowledge and practical capability. So how is someone going to perform a core task? Are they going to perform this core task with accuracy and compliance? Where's the proficiency, in relation to their skills and experience in the role? So this is great for regulated roles, specialist or trade positions, and roles requiring immediate capability. So the technical assessments don't measure behaviour or long-term potential. Over to you, Mel, for a DISC overview.
Back to me. So yeah, I'm going to speak about the DISC profiling tool. So I mentioned that at the beginning that I've had many years in HR, and as part of my HR journey, a lot of my work has been in organisational development, L&D, training and development, and leadership coaching, leadership executive coaching. And I guess over that time, I've kind of looked at using different tools to support different processes and to support facilitating team training and group sessions and things like that. And so I've just found that DISC for me is one of the most universal tools that has a lot of broad practical applications in a workplace. And so it's a simple tool, but it's very commonly used for things like communication and team building. So I'm just going to talk through that. So what is DISC? DISC is a behavioural profiling tool. So again, it looks at how people tend to behave, and it'll provide you with a report about your preferred or dominant style, but it's never going to pigeonhole you and say you're only one particular style at every time on every occasion. It looks at your preferences and where you're, say for example, what you find more easy than other tasks and what you feel are your strengths. So it's an acronym. So DISC is an acronym. It's based on 4 primary behavioural dimensions. And this is actually one of the core things I really like about DISC is it's quite simple. These 4 dimensions are So D stands for dominance, I is influence, S is steadiness, and C is conscientiousness. And when you complete a DISC assessment and you receive a report, it's going to tell you what combination of all of those styles you are. You're not going to end up being just one thing. You'll be a combination. And in some areas you might be high, in some areas you might be low. But so each of these particular domains has particular traits and behavioral preferences. So D for dominance, things like the communication style tends to be direct, bold, very results oriented, and enjoys challenges. I, the influence domain, is often more about the sort of social butterfly and somebody who's motivated by social interaction and developing relationships, and they're quite expressive and they're very optimistic. Yeah, big ideas and lots of excitement about things and enthusiasm. The S steadiness profile is generally quite a stable, supportive profile where somebody tends to be wanting to be the carer for people. It's a bit of a nurturing domain, and so people who fall under the S can seek stability and want to be able to support people and perhaps be in the background. C typically is for conscientiousness, but also sometimes compliance, and so very much driven by facts and data, accuracy, correctness, doing their research, making sure that their decisions are sound and well researched. And so, yeah, we're all a combination of all of these things, and some areas will be high and some areas will be low. So when you get a report, it gives you a bit of an overview. You can see by this graph that, where the areas you might be particularly high or low in. And from that gives you some further insight into how you're likely to behave in certain situations and your natural preferences. The DISC report will also enable you to match that against your current environment to say, what my natural preferred style of operating, how does that align with the current working environment I'm in? Is it a good match? And sometimes if people are constantly stretched beyond their preferred profile style, that can lead to burnout or stress. So the report, it can be a very comprehensive report, but at the end of the day, it's coming back to 4 domains. And so because of that, it's quite simple, and it can be a really good tool to use in group training for that reason. It's very simple language. So it works by a questionnaire. So if you were to complete a DISC report, you'd be presented with a series of statements or word groups. And so it's one of those ones where you answer, is this most like me? Is this least like me? So there'll be a scale. It might be, I strongly disagree with this statement, or I agree. And you'll then get either an individual report. You can also provide a team report as well. The team reports can be quite good when you're mapping team dynamics and building team camaraderie, things like that. So you can look at, well, what is the different spread of the behavioural styles that we have here? How is that showing up in the way that we work? What are our strengths as a team? Where are there potentially gaps based on this team profile? So DISC is really designed to measure observable behavioural preferences. And so that's why I have found it really good to use in things like training and coaching, because these are things that people demonstrate. So it's how someone likes to communicate. Do they like to communicate with facts and figures? Are they a very emotive communicator? Are they somebody who's very direct and blunt and just wants to get to the point? And that's really crucial to understand, because a lot of the things that we see in HR that lead to needing mediation or conflict resolution are often just differences in communication styles. So DISC is really good at identifying or helping people understand their own personal preferences, but also the people around them, and sort of going, oh, maybe that's why we're not getting along so good. We're just communicating differently. It's not personal. So DISC also looks at how someone makes decisions. Certain profile styles in the DISC model will be much slower to make decisions, particularly if there's someone like a high C profile where they really want to have their data and their ducks in a row before they make a decision. So decision making could be a lengthy, cautious process for that person. Other profiles might make more rapid decisions. And again, we see that in organisations where people have different paces, and that results in conflict or tension in workplaces. So it also looks at how people respond to problems, pressure, and stress. So, how they tend to act when they're, so say, for example, certain styles, if they're upset or aggrieved, will be silent, and others will be very vocal, and you'll very much know that they're not happy. But by knowing some things like this, you can sort of go, oh, hang on, that person's gone quiet, they were withdrawn. I might need to just sort of check in with them and see how they're going, because that can indicate for them that they're struggling with something. It also helps you understand for yourself, but also if you were doing this, say, for your team members, understand how they like to work. Do they like to have structure? Do they like clear expectations, or do they like autonomy and flexibility? You can also get a gauge of whether you're best working with, isolated, more solitary tasks versus more social, people-based roles. And it looks at behavioural style. It's not assessing ability. It's not assessing intelligence, values, or personality. So personality tends to be more static throughout your life. It does evolve and change, but behaviours are a lot more fluid and flexible. People can change behaviours based on the situation they're in. I could change my behaviours across the course of a day. But DISC tells you what's your default preferred easy style. So how Strawberry Seed uses DISC, we have used it in our leadership training, in our Lead with Impact program, as a tool for insight for leaders themselves to identify their own strengths and to look at their areas for development, or perhaps the blind spots that they might have. It's really helpful for individual coaching, just for someone to understand themselves. But the thing I like about DISC is that it doesn't just give you insight into yourself, it gives you a framework and a common language then to look at how you all interact with people around you. So it really can be of great assistance for things like mediation and conflict resolution and building empathy, just to understand that I'm just operating differently to somebody else. It might not be personal, and I might be reading too much into this. We're just communicating differently. So hugely valuable for communication skills training. That's something that we get a lot of value out of with using DISC. So it's particularly useful when you want to build behavioural self-awareness. It's helpful as a tool because it's simple, but that can also be a criticism of DISC, is that it's not sophisticated enough. It doesn't, it's sometimes viewed as just a bit too simple. People can't just be put in a box, but it's really good for improving communication within teams, supporting leadership development, reducing interpersonal conflict, tailoring performance conversations. So leaders, when they have a DISC profile for their people that work for them, they can understand exactly how to engage with that person, how to give that person feedback, how they respond under pressure, what work energizes them and what drains them. And so, yeah, and it gives a simple shared language for discussing differences. So that's why I like it. So there's going to be times where a more sophisticated tool than DISC is required, and Tan's going to talk about Facet5, which is a little bit more sophisticated. So DISC can be quite simple. It's not sufficient, I believe, if you really want to examine cognitive ability for complex problem solving. If you're a complex organisation with complex strategic executive leadership requirements, something like Facet5 might be a preferred tool. DISC doesn't do in-depth emotional intelligence assessment, so wouldn't say to maybe use it for high-risk hiring decisions. So it's best used, I believe, as a development communication tool and not a high-stakes selection filter. It can be used in recruitment, though again, it's not going to give you that deep, sophisticated insight that some other tools would, but it can help you if you want to map what gaps you might have in your existing team in terms of the different profile styles, where you might need to build capability in certain areas, and to help design the type of interview questions that you might want to ask. As we've said for all of these tools, DISC is one tool in the toolbox to inform decisions, and it's not about using that as an ultimate decision-making tool. I do find it really good for supporting employee development. So it really increases self-awareness, but as I said, it's a tool that you can also, by understanding the model, you can then use that to understand others around you. So it's not just deep personal insight, it's valuable for how you then go and carry that into the world and how you interact with people. So it can help you identify blind spots, stress responses, can help leaders understand where they might need to support employees to flex their style or get support in certain areas. So in performance management, it can be really good. I touched on this in terms of how people like to receive feedback. For example, if a leader knows that one of their team members is quite sensitive and takes feedback very, very, difficult in a difficult way, they might have a way of making sure that they have a softer discussion with that person or are more cognizant of the emotional impact of that conversation. Whereas some of the other profile styles might just want, cut to the chase, give me the information. So it's about adapting your communication style to suit the recipient. So again, I've touched on this about workplace tensions. We see this a lot in our field. We're often asked to help step in when there's some interpersonal conflict or tension in the workplace, and we do often find that DISC can be a really good tool for helping it unpack exactly why the conflict is there. And often it does come back to things like communication style, pace of decision making. Somebody is frustrated because this person takes forever to make a decision and they need urgency. So it's a lot of those sort of things, and by just knowing yourself and the others around you, it just really builds empathy so that you can depersonalize conflict and understand it through a different lens. I've touched on the fact that under stress the styles can demonstrate different patterns, and so again that can be really helpful for managers to be aware of that, for looking for signs in their staff of stress. As I said, we use it in leadership a lot. So we have found it's really good for leaders to develop their own awareness of their own skills, but also to be a more effective leader in the way that they communicate and interact with their team members. So it enables them to build complementary teams. It can help them allocate work based on strengths. So teams where if a manager knows that one particular employee loves data and research, they might assign projects to them that align with that because they know that's going to energize that person. And so that's a good way to help the employee feel fulfilled and retain good people by giving them opportunities to play to their strengths. And so, to help leaders coach people just by having insight into how people like to behave and communicate. So it's a simple tool. I really like it for that reason. And it does add value mostly in communication, leadership development, and team effectiveness. And it's most powerful as a shared language tool because it's a simple model. It's a model people can walk away and remember the DISC model and apply that going forward. Okay.
Thanks, Mel. Before I take a closer look into Facet5, I'm just conscious that I'm going to be touching on a lot of things that Mel's touched on with DISC. And look, Strawberry Seed obviously recommend both these tools. Both of them absolutely have their place. And when you're deciding on which tool to actually use, it's going to depend on a multitude of things. Specifically what's the objective of the business, the complexity of the business, and the audience. I also want to point out as well that with these assessments, there's actually no right or wrong. There's no good or bad. It's just giving you insight into how someone behaves and their natural preferences in the workplace. Okay, so Facet5, it's a personality assessment and it's grounded by the big 5-factor model that I touched on earlier before. So the areas that Facet5 specifically look at and categorize these areas into is will, energy, affection, control, and emotionality. So these factors combine to create a detailed and practical picture of behavior in the workplace. So Facet5 is actually one of the most researched frameworks and validated frameworks of all of the assessments that are available. A little bit like DISC, it's online questions, typically about 15 to 20 minutes to complete. Responses are benchmarked against a large comparison group. You get individual reports. You can also get team reports. There's various types of reports that you can produce. from the assessment, and the results are stable over time and supported by research. So that's one of the strengths of Facet5. And these reports translate personality science into workplace language. Okay, so what does Facet5 tell you? So it's about someone's preferred leadership style, their communication approach, their decision-making tendencies, their motivators and potential stress triggers, and the likely impact on team dynamics. So it provides insight into behavior, not the ability or technical skill, which is the same as what Mel touched on with DISC. So what is Facet5 most appropriate for? And again, there are lots of crossovers between DISC and Facet5. So Facet5 can also be used for leadership development, executive coaching, succession planning, building high-performing teams, and then recruitment for roles where behavioral fit is really critical. So it's less suitable when you need to measure technical competence or cognitive ability. But like I said, both Facet5 and DISC absolutely have their place, and what tool is going to be best is going to depend on a multitude of things. What is different from DISC with Facet5 is that it measures emotionality. So emotionality measures the level of tension and apprehension that a person experiences in their everyday lives. So this is about how someone responds to stress, their emotional resilience, their tendency towards anxiety or worry, and stability under pressure. So this is a core psychological trait, not just a behavioral style. And with measuring the emotionality, it can actually have an impact on the other 4 factors within the assessment. So, for example, high emotionality people would suggest that, perhaps they come across as a little bit unstable, whereas low emotionality, that can actually flatten the responses from the other 4 areas. So that's a really important and different measure that Facet5 works with. So compared to comparing Facet5 and DISC, the Facet5 is a trait-based rather than type-based tool as well. So it reflects personality on a spectrum, so not in boxes. So it provides just a little bit more detailed behavioral insight, and it's grounded in personality research. So, for example, a type-based assessment would put people into clear categories. So, for example, with DISC, you would be a dominant style. You're placed in a defined box. It's easy to understand and explain, and it's very helpful for simple team language. Trait-based assessments measure personality on a spectrum, so there's no fixed boxes. So rather than being an introvert or an extrovert, it would be more like low, moderate, or high extroversion. So that's another difference to the DISC profile. The thing I really particularly love about the Facet5 assessment tool is the My Facet5 app. So this is great for like leadership coaching and development. So your results are available on an app, and it gives you all of these opportunities to actually create tailored development plans that you can use with conversations with managers, and you can track your progress against it. You can share your report with someone, your development plans with someone. It really supports conversations for ongoing growth and development. So a really great, very detailed and insightful tool. The other thing that I wanted to just touch on before I hand over to Carly is that, people do ask, can your assessments change? And they actually can change, and they often do. And they can change. Well, research suggests that they actually can change with maturity and age. So results can change with maturity and age, but it also can change based on what's going on in the environment and with you personally. That does have an impact on your results. So when people do these assessments, it's not something that's necessarily set in stone. They can be fluid and can change based on environmental factors, personal situations, and also with age. But like I said, we love Facet5, we love DISC. They've both got their place. And I hope that this has given you all a little bit more understanding of the different assessment type tools that are available to you and their practical implication into the workplace. So over to you, Carly.
Thank you, Tanya. If you can take me to the next slide, please. So yeah, look, as the girls have gone through, we are accredited in two different tools. And at the end of the day, it's all about fit for purpose. So if these are the sort of things that you're interested in or interested in how you might want to use them in your business, please feel free to reach out and we can, chat about what the different options are, from team workshops through to individual situations. Sometimes we might have a client that just has someone who's really struggling, maybe in a leadership role, and some one-to-one coaching with Mel and, doing an assessment tool that helps them get some more understanding can be really effective. We have other times where there is that conflict in the workplace where there's two people that are both really great, but they're different and they're not getting on and it's causing other issues. Getting some insight for them can be really, really helpful for them to be able to continue to work together. But before we get to the questions, we've got our March webinar coming up next month. I'm going to be talking about attendance leave and fairness. So basically managing patterns of leave, whether that's patterns of sick leave or, annual leave, maybe, some of the trickier questions we get around leave and attendance that might be helpful. Guys, I'm going to be relying on you. Oh, look at them go. So we have some training, public training system calendar is all up for the rest of, for most of this year. Coming up in March, we're just starting a new series called our Leadership Skill Deep Dive, where we kind of, get into much more detail on one particular topic. And the first one of those we're doing is conflict management. And that is a 3-hour online session, and that's coming up on the 11th of March. I think the early bird might have just finished for that. And also we have our first public leadership training workshop. We've rebranded that as Leadership Essentials Workshops. We're having them across a number of different states this year, and Melbourne is our first one, and that is coming up, and early bird still is open for that. In the past, we've done a 6-hour one-day workshop, and we've now split them into 2 half days. So we can spend a little bit more time and have a little bit more time for discussion and go a bit deeper into some topics. So that's a bit of a change for us this year. So if you're interested in any of those, we also have our Lead with Impact, Grow Your Leadership Skills. That's our online 5-month leadership course. We have moved it to commence in May, and that is something that is very much a combination of over 5 months. There's live online workshops as well as some pre and post work and resources that you can access. So that just goes a lot deeper into a lot of different topics. And the first module of that is actually include DISC. So that's actually getting a DISC assessment and then really understanding how to use that and get some self-insight and understanding yourself before we start to get into your leadership journey, so you understand how you operate as a leader. And it's really, I know, and I'm sure Mel does as well, it's really fun watching leaders get that self-insight for the first time on, understanding, oh, that might be why I'm, operating this way. And I'm a really strong D, but all my employees are Cs, and no wonder I get so frustrated with them. So I really love that as a tool. But, as always, you can follow us on all the different platforms and you can visit our website for more information. But I'd really like to open it up for some questions. If anyone has got any questions and wants to throw them in the Q&A, now's your time to do it. Look, I think it's really important to remember that as both Mel and Tan have said, is that no tool is infallible. And I remember going for a job with an engineering firm, and it was down to myself and another candidate, and they put me through like every test known to man, aptitude. I did technical testing. And what was really interesting, particularly being an engineering firm and as a HR person coming into an engineering firm, is I found out later that my actual aptitude and problem solving and things like that actually turned me from being second to being first. Because the CEO, the managing director of our division, he actually that really he wanted to use that as his sole decision maker because he went, "Ooh, that's really important to me." It turns there was a number of different factors in the end, but it was really interesting for me to find that out afterwards. And so it's also how the person who is doing the testing and reading the reports, it's also how they interpret them as well. But what I really love about it, and we've certainly done it with our whole Strawberry Seed team, is just getting that bit of insight. I'm someone who is pretty high in an I and an S, and I tend to see the new pretty shiny thing and just want to jump in and do it. And I stress someone like Mel out considerably because she likes her detail and she likes to time to ponder. It has to, as a leader, it's really helpful for you to be able to rethink how you have to go about things, and also getting that map of your entire team, because the last thing that you want is to have your entire team to be in the same, all sit around the same area, because then you get a lot of group think and like thinking. It's really good to have a bit of a mix, but I can't see any questions popping up for now, so I think we can call it a night. Thank you so much, Mel and Tan, for all your hard work in putting this together. Very much appreciated. And as I said, if anybody has got any questions about these tools, wants to learn a little bit more, please reach out to our team. We are more than happy to just, answer questions and, see how you might want to use it. And that, as we said, it can be particularly useful for recruitment. Though I think we all, I know organisations that want to use it for every single role. We tend to suggest that you use it fit for purpose, like if there's because it can get expensive if you try and do it with every role, particularly in smaller companies. So, if you've got a key role that is really critical to your business, it can be that extra layer that really, really helps you get more insight and make the right choice for your business. So thanks, Tan. Thanks, Mel, for your time. And everybody have a great evening, and we'll be sending out a copy of this in the next few days. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye. Bye.